In Venezuela, President and candidate for the Great Patriotic Poll, Nicolás Maduro, denounced racist and discriminatory speech by journalists linked to the far right. Also in Venezuela, 265 citizens arrived from Mexico as part of the Return to the Homeland mission. In the Ivory Coast, authorities launched the first malaria vaccination campaign for the country's children. Hello, welcome from the South. I'm Luis Alberto Matos from the teleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. In Venezuela, the president and candidate for the Great Patriotic Poll, Nicolás Maduro, denounced racist and discriminatory expressions by journalists linked to sectors of the Venezuelan far right. During his visit to Ciudad Bolívar, the head of state rejected the fascist, violent and racist threat campaign orchestrated in social medias by so-called journalists supported by leaders of the far right, emphasizing they should be brought to justice as their speech constitutes hate crime. He further called on Venezuelans not to fall into deceptions promoted by the opposition. President Maduro was received by a crowd in Bolívar who ratified their support and backing for his candidacy. There he expressed his security and confidence in his people before the presidential elections of next July 28th.
Ellos son el odio.
They are hate, intolerance, violence, racism. Look at what they post. I want you to see it because they go on social media, and sometimes one does not even stop them, but that is how they think. Look at how the far right unleashes the demons of fascism. The far right wing requests sanctions for Venezuela. That far right is getting ready for violence to shout fraud. Are you willing guerrilla uprisings to return to Bolivar City? Are you willing hate, intolerance, division to come back? Or do you prefer love, tolerance and peace to come back?
Also in Venezuela, on Monday, the opposition candidate Luis Eduardo Martinez visited the state of Cojedes as part of his campaign ahead of the presidential elections on July 28th. In this regard, the candidate of the Democratic Action Party during his visit to the central western state promoted the participation of the Venezuelan people in the upcoming elections. In the meantime, Martinez highlighted the potential that Venezuela has to turn agronomy into a national supply option. In this sense, he assured that as part of his government plan, he will pay more attention to the states that can strengthen the agronomy issues. Meanwhile, the candidate to the presidency of Venezuela for the Party for Change, Javier Bertucci, highlighted that as part of his electoral campaign, he will continue his meetings with all the pastors of the country. In this way, he assures that more than an economic advance, Venezuela needs a spiritual rebirth, giving to the Christian church the responsibility of guiding this process. Bertucci made reference to the construction of a force for Venezuela to take the course of faith. Also in the elections context in Venezuela, the candidate for the presidency for the Solutions Party, Claudio Fermin, expressed his disagreement with the candidacy of Edmundo González, chosen of the far right, assuring that he is under the auspices of a foreign power. Furthermore, Claudio Fermin stated that he disagrees with the request for sanctions against the Venezuelan people made by the sector that supports candidate González. On the other hand, Fermin emphasized that his objective is to replace sectarianism with openness and to weave networks in common cause without blackmail, putting just causes in forefront. He affirmed that his government program will address issues related to gender diversity, such as equal marriage, as part of what he called inclusive governance. Still on the topic of Venezuela's elections and the presidential race, during an interview, the candidate for the Conde Party, Benjamin Rousseau, exhorted the Venezuelan people to vote less by emotion and more by reason. In that sense, he emphasized that people expect immediate results. However, he affirmed that if elected, he will initiate a process of reunification, adding that he will identify the existing problems in order to find someone to be held responsible for causing them. In Venezuela, dozens of electoral polls have provoked a debate due to their dissimilar results and the discovery that many of them turned out to be false. We analyzed this instrument in the following report by our correspondent, Leonel Retamal.
In the streets of Caracas, there is no common opinion on the electoral polls.
I don't trust those things very much, but it's better to go with what you think is best. The vote is one's own.
In Venezuela, the polls are offering very dissimilar results, and in some cases with such wide margins that they seem unreal compared to previous instances. So what role are they playing?
The actual electoral participation is the one that ends up defining the result and not the intention to vote. Because the intention to vote is a declaration of sympathy, a declaration of leaning towards a candidate, but it does not mean that the voter actually manages to put the vote in the ballot box. There is a very important distance between one act and the other.
In private uses, polling firms provide reliable information for economic or institutional decisions, but those that are being circulated do not seem reliable for presidential election predictions.
The polls have no more importance or validity than what the public opinion gives them. What we are witnessing is the search to manage a climate in which the opposition has more opportunities than it really has. In this sense, there is the issue of the polls, also the issue of the use of bots and social networks.
These are the same pollsters that have referred to supposed levels of rejection of 70 to 80% of the population against President Maduro when in reality these expressions have not been reflected in the electoral results. This means that there is a very important accumulation of failed polls that have resulted in failed predictions.
The results have created scenarios of triumphalism for the opposition, as in previous occasions. Some spokespersons would practically ignore the election result. This strategy hides an objective.
In Venezuela, we are also in a very delicate period, a seditious one, in the search to disregard the electoral result. And one of the proofs to disregard, in quotation marks, that electoral result, may be the use of this type of polls that deceive the electorate with such a wide difference of votes for the candidates.
Polls are an instrument that is always being put to the test as forecaster of elections.
Let's now take a short break, but remember you can join us on TikTok at teleSUR English, where you will find news in different formats, news updates, and much more. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. Let's go now live with our special envoy, Yunus Soner, who is in Caracas for more updates relating to the return to the homeland mission. Hello, Yunus, what can you tell us?
Hello, good day from Caracas, Venezuela. We just returned from the Simón Bolívar International Airport that lived a historic day with the arrival of 261 passengers from Mexico. Why was that a historic day? Because these passengers were returning home. They were returning home within the plan of return to home, and they were received warmly with a band playing the hymn and other musical works of Venezuelan culture, and they were also received by the Venezuelan Foreign Minister Iván Gil at the airport. They have been brought to Venezuela. They decided to return to Venezuela voluntarily, of course, and they took part in a government plan that enables people who have no means to return by themselves to be assisted, and take government-organized planes. So this was a flight of Conviasa, the flag carrier of Venezuela, that brought these 261 passengers to the airport of Simón Bolívar International. Here, the foreign minister of Venezuela made a short statement, held a short speech welcoming the Venezuelan citizens. He said, "This is your land, this is your country, this is your soil." Iván Gil made quite an enthusiastic speech, actually. He emphasized that Venezuela is in recovery, in economic recovery, that it needs all the hands and all the minds it can get to continue this recovery. He said that he does not blame any of the immigrants who had left Venezuela. He does not blame them at all. He says he knows that they were misled by false hopes of a good life. And he also emphasized that the reason for that was the basic, fundamental reason for that were the sanctions of the United States directed against the economy of Venezuela. But again, the foreign minister was more optimistic, and he invited the immigrants to take part in the recovery, in the let's say resurgence of the Venezuelan economy in the days ahead. This is their return is part of a plan of a great mission of coming home, as it's called here, that started as a plan to return to homeland. Now it's called the Great Mission to Return to Homeland, and it does not just consist in organizing the transfer from abroad to Venezuela. It also includes different steps of reintegrating these citizens into the Venezuelan society and economy. It starts with judicial assistance, it starts with bureaucratic assistance, so that these citizens can register themselves in the Venezuelan system, and it continues with cultural assistance as well as socio-economic assistance to reintegrate them into the economy, into the society. And we just talked to some of them, and they stated clearly that the promises of a better life abroad, be it in Mexico, be it some of them even had made it to the United States, were false, so they were quite happy to return. And we observed at the airport a quite positive, warm atmosphere on both sides, of course, on the side of the minister and his assistants, as well as on the side of the Venezuelan citizens who carried Venezuelan flags. They were smiling, they were happy, little children among them. They were happy to be back in Venezuela, and they are now being transferred to their home cities if they live abroad of Caracas, or to their neighborhoods if they stay in Caracas by government buses. 20 buses, I think, are organized for that purpose, that will carry these citizens first to their homes. As the foreign minister emphasized, first task is that they re-meet with their families, their friends, their neighbors, their beloved ones, and then, as the minister said, the integration process will start that will lead to them joining the recovery of Venezuela. The Venezuelan foreign minister also stated that since that program started in 2018, the government had assisted more than 500,000 citizens in returning home. He emphasized that there were diplomatic meetings and agreements with Mexico enabling these transfers. He called also other countries to join the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela in its efforts to enable their citizens to return home. As I said, this is a voluntary return. This is a service that the government offers to those who want to return to Venezuela and have no economic means. The minister said that beyond those that the government had assisted, more than 1 million had returned to Venezuela also by their own means.
Thank you, Yunus, for the updated information from Caracas. Let's continue with our news. We stay in Venezuela. Both the governments of Caracas and Belarus established on Monday a long-term bilateral agenda in the context of high-level cooperation between the two nations. This was announced by the Venezuelan Foreign Minister Ivan Hill on his account on the social media X, after a meeting with the Prime Minister of the Eastern European state, Roma Golubchenko, who arrived in the South American country the day before on an official visit. He said that the agenda covers food production, trade, the petrochemical industry, and the reactivation of factories and heavy machinery. He added that they also discussed shared challenges and goals to ensure the well-being and development of their respective peoples. And Brazil's Supreme Federal Court Minister Alexandre de Moraes authorized 2 people implicated in the 2018 murder of Councilwoman Marielle Franco to testify on the July 15th and 16th at the Chamber of Deputies. De Moraes authorized Rivaldo Barbosa, former chief of the civil police of Rio de Janeiro, and Domingo Brachao, former councillor of the court auditors of that territorial division, to give their testimonies through hearings conducted by video conferences coordinated by the Council of Ethics and Parliamentary Decorum of the lower house. During the course of these days, the defendants, who have been detained since March for their involvement in their crime against Marielle Franco, will testify publicly for the first time. Meanwhile, the Brazilian Foreign Ministry called its ambassador in Buenos Aires, Julio Vitelli, for consultations due to diplomatic tensions with the government of Javier Milei. The Brazilian representatives in Buenos Aires met with Foreign Minister Mauro Vieira to discuss the situation and how to improve relations with Casa Rosada. Vitelli declared that the idea is to talk about the bilateral relationship, how to move it forward in the best possible way with the attention it deserves. He added that both presidents have different views, and the concern is that this does not damage the relationship. He continued saying that President Lula is clear regarding the relationship between the two countries must remain as strong and important as it is, regardless of differences in priority. On Monday, the Republican Party officially nominated U.S. former President Donald Trump as its candidate for the position of president in the November 2024 elections. During the Republican National Convention, which has been taking place since Monday, nearly 2,400 delegates cast their votes in favor of Trump, who received 2,387 votes. Next Thursday, Trump is due to officially accept his nomination as a candidate with a closing convention speech. The former president also announced that Ohio State Senator James David Vance would be his vice presidential running mate. According to Trump, during the campaign, Vance will focus on U.S. workers and farmers in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, Minnesota, and beyond. Now let's get to know about James David Vance, the Republican vice presidential candidate for the United States upcoming election on November 5th. James David Vance is a conservative politician, businessman, and writer. Vance is a 40-year-old former member of the U.S. Navy who served in the Iraq War. He has a doctorate in laws and achieved political science and philosophy studies. In 2022, Vance debuted as a politician when he was elected Ohio State Senator. Vance repeatedly spoken out against the funding of the Ukrainian conflict and the confiscation of Russian assets, while he also suggested that the United States should prioritize its defense capabilities to counter China. We have a fun short break coming up, but before we invite you to join our WhatsApp community for our English-speaking audience. You can scan the QR code on screen to join directly and share the link to reach more people. Constant news coverage of Latin America and the Caribbean as well as the rest of the world. Fun short break, don't go away. Welcome back. In Palestine, at least 35 people were killed in Israeli overnight attacks in different areas of the Gaza Strip. In this context, local sources reported a bombardment targeting the house of the Hamad family in the Nuseirat refugee camp, claiming the lives of 11 people and left dozens of wounded who were transferred to the Martyrs Al-Aqsa hospital. Medical authorities also reported that 19 people were killed in attacks over the city of Rafah and Han Yunis, among other areas. It should be noted that after 284 days of the genocidal aggression launched by Israel, the number of people killed in the devastated Palestinian enclave has reached 38,664, most of whom are children and women. In other news, Ivory Coast launched on Monday its first malaria vaccination campaign for the country's children. The first doses were administered in Abidjan, the country's commercial capital. The Ivorian Minister of Health, Pierre Dimba, informed during an official ceremony that malaria transmitted by mosquitoes kills 4 people a day, including 3 children under 5 years of age, becoming also the first cause of medical consultation in the country. The official highlighted that Ivory Coast is the first nation to deploy a vaccine against the disease, being the most neglected infection in the world, with 95% of the cases and 96% of deaths occurring in Africa.
Unfortunately, it is in Africa, where 94% of cases and 95% of deaths are concentrated. Africa bears the heaviest malaria burden, and children are particularly vulnerable. Every year, nearly 2.5 million children die from malaria in Africa.
Meanwhile, the Ivorian Minister of Health, Pierre Dimba, informed that 250,000 children from 6 to 23 months old will be inoculated during the first phase of vaccination.
The introduction of the malaria vaccine into the routine expanded program of immunization represents a major step forward in our fight. By vaccinating our children from 6 to 23 months old, we can protect them against severe forms of malaria and significantly reduce deaths associated with this disease. This introduction will be phased in gradually to reach all regions of our country. This first phase of vaccination affects 250,000 children aged 6 to 23 months.
On Tuesday, Afghan authorities raised to 40 the death toll and more than 300 number of people injured by the rains and floods that hit eastern Afghanistan. The storm hit several towns in Nangarhar province on Monday, including the provincial capital, causing unquantified economic losses. Among the dead are 5 people from the same family who were inside their home when it collapsed due to the rains. The Afghan Meteorological Department forecasts heavy rainfall in at least 7 provinces over the next few days. The heavy rainfall in Nangarhar province is the latest in a series of extreme weather events that have hit Afghanistan in recent years.
Yesterday, there was storm and rain one right following the other. The storm happened after the rain. This house collapsed on people, 15 people lived here, and 7 perished at the collapse.
Like this, we have come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website, telesurenglish.net. So join us on social media, Facebook, X, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For Telesur English, I'm Luis Alberto Matos. Thank you for watching.